welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Diemez.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher.
And today we're excited to be celebrating our 100th episode.
This is a great milestone for us, and really, it's just another reason for me to eat some cake.
But we also want to take a moment to thank our viewers and listeners for helping us to get here.
Yes, that's right. Thank you all so much, and also thank you for letting me celebrate with some cake.
All right, so clearly this boy loves him some cake, but we're going to move on to a rundown of the show. So today we have philosopher and theologian Ken Samples, astronomer Hugh Ross, and Stuart McAllister of RZIM.
They'll be covering topics such as what does Christianity say about reality, climate change, and the younger Dryas cooling event. And Jeff and Stuart will be answering the question, what is freedom, in the Give and Take segment.
But first up is RTB 101. Krista Bontrager will be talking with biochemist Fazale Rana about why RTB affirms a genetic Adam and Eve.
Let's check that out.
And eat some cake.
Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to help equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very important question about the first humans is my colleague, Dr. Faz Rana. Welcome, Faz.
Krista, how are you doing?
Well, we are surviving the virus,
Yeah,
and we are grateful for technology so that the show can go on.
Yes, we sure are.
Now, one of the distinguishing features of our testable creation model strategy at Reasons to Believe is that we think about the first humans in a very specific way. Maybe we could start by having you summarize the position that we take about Adam and Eve. What is the biblical evidence that leads us to believe that they were, in fact, the first humans?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, Krista, at Reasons to Believe, we take the view that Adam and Eve were the first human beings created uniquely in God's image, and that all humanity comes from Adam and Eve. And we would argue that this view is a view that is consistently taught throughout the totality of Scripture, the Old and the New Testament. So, for example, when you look at the Genesis 2 creation account, it's very clear to me when you read that account that Adam and Eve are being depicted as the first human beings. The genealogy in Genesis 5, which goes from Adam to Noah, clearly indicates that all humanity comes from Adam, and that the image of God that Adam was created to possess is transferred through reproduction to all of his descendants, as well as the effects of original sin. We go to Luke, the genealogy in Luke, which is Jesus's genealogy. It traces back to Adam. And this is significant because it's telling us that Jesus represents every human being in Adam in that sense. And of course, the Apostle Paul in Romans and in 1 Corinthians talks about Jesus as the second Adam, comparing Jesus's life, death, and resurrection to Adam's rebellion against God, where Jesus undoes the damage that Adam caused, where Adam, because of his rebellion, had the consequences of his sin impact all humanity, and the consequences of Jesus, again, crucifixion and resurrection from the dead, undoes the damage that all human beings suffer from. So the biblical text is very clear, I think, that there was a historical Adam and Eve that gave rise to all humanity, and that this is central to key doctrines in the Christian faith.
That's a really good overview of the biblical evidence for believing that Adam and Eve were the first pair. Now I wonder if we can kind of switch the conversation a little bit and looking at the scientific evidence. Are there reasons to believe that Adam and Eve were the first, in fact, genetic pair, that they were really our true genetic ancestors?
Yeah, and what we mean when we say that Adam and Eve are our genetic ancestors is this idea that that human beings, anatomically and behaviorally modern humans, all come from Adam and Eve, and that when they were created to be genetically distinct, genetically unique compared to every other creature that existed, including hominins such as Neanderthals. And so everybody that is genetically in Adam bears that unique genetic fingerprint that identifies them as a human being. And we would argue that There is nothing in the scientific evidence that suggests that there could not have been a primordial pair from which all humanity emanates. And of course, you've got these very provocative concepts like mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam that suggest, at least with regard to certain genetic markers, that we can trace an origin of humanity back to single individuals, a single female and a single male individual. Now, are these the biblical Adam and Eve? I think that could be debated, but it's very clear that you can show genetically that it's possible to trace humanity's origin back to single individuals.
I think that's a really helpful explanation. And I know that this is an area that, in general terms, we as old Earth creationists actually agree with young Earth creationists that Adam and Eve were the first pair. But I also know that there's alternative scenarios that are being put forth by some Christians as a different scenario where Adam and Eve were not necessarily our genetic ancestors. Maybe you can tell us about those ideas.
Yeah, and one of the things that is part of the controversy about Adam and Eve relates to the genetic variability of people alive today. And the claim is that the genetic variability of people alive today is too great to come from two individuals. Therefore, there must have been a population of human beings at the very onset. There could never have been an original pair. Now, we dispute that assertion at Reasons to Believe, but that is a common assertion. And so therefore, you see three distinct approaches that people take to try to work around that particular issue. One is to argue that maybe Adam and Eve were not real individuals, instead that they were mythical, or that they were theological constructs, and that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are really mythology, not historical or not scientifically accurate, but mythical, where they are communicating theological truths. Another approach is to say, well, Adam and Eve were historical, but maybe they were representatives that were part of this initial population that God then selected and placed in the Garden of Eden. And then a third approach that recently has gained prominence, though it's not necessarily a new approach, is to say, well, Adam and Eve were not our genetic ancestors, but instead were our genealogical ancestors, where we would trace our origins back to this couple that were our genealogical ancestors, just like we would trace our family tree back to our, distant ancestors who would have lived in the past. That would be the patriarchs and the matriarchs of our family. So those are the three different approaches, but the key point here is they all are motivated by this attempt to try to reconcile this claim that the genetic variability of humanity is too great to come from two individuals.
Now, with those alternative scenarios that are being proposed by some Christians, what do you see as some potential biblical or scientific obstacles to those alternative theories?
Well, for example, I don't think it's a great maneuver to claim that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are not scientifically or historically accurate, that they're mythical. Because once you do that, you now have completely eroded the foundation of the Christian faith. Key doctrines of Christianity are embedded in those very important chapters, and you've completely undermined Christianity when you do that. Now, in terms of the representative view or the genealogical view, they both suffer from the same problem, and that is this. In both views, you have to have human beings that are exactly alike Adam and Eve in every sense of the word, physically and behaviorally, but yet those individuals would not bear the image of God, and Adam and Eve would bear the image of God. And so this now creates some very troubling scenarios where you would have people that would be alive at different times in human history that wouldn't technically be image bearers, and that there's only a particular group of people that would bear God's image. And so this creates a lot of issues in terms of the dignity and the sanctity of all human life, but it also creates issues in terms of what do we mean by the image of God? How can we claim that everybody is an Adam in these kind of scenarios? And then finally, how do we understand the effects of the fall and the impact of original sin on all human beings in these kind of scenarios? So the theological issues are really quite significant when it comes to the genealogical view and the representative view.
Well, thanks for breaking all that down for us, Fuzz. And I do want to encourage our viewers to get connected with Fuzz's blog. It's called The Cells Design, and you can check that out on our website at reasons.org. Now we're going to hear from our staff theologian and philosopher, Kenneth Samples. He's talking about the question, what does Christianity say about reality? Let's check it out.
And one way of thinking about the Christian worldview is in 4 phases. This isn't the only way you can talk about a worldview. You could talk about a worldview as a cluster of beliefs about God and humanity, ethics, etc. But I think that this is a very helpful way of thinking about reality. The Christian worldview says that reality comes to us in 4 stages. The first one is creation. The triune God, who is a necessary being, alone exists. And that triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, calls all contingent realities into existence from nothing. To put it in a science context, all matter, energy, space, and time come into being because God speaks or God calls. Subsequently, God creates human beings. He creates them in His image. And then the second stage, fall, human beings are given freedom. And yet they misuse that human freedom and choose to rebel against God, and they suffer alienation and separation from God. They're fallen. That fallen nature from Adam and Eve are then passed on to his progeny, to you and me. And yet the story doesn't end there. The second person of the Trinity, the Son, equal to the Father and the Spirit, comes into the world at the incarnation, takes human flesh, and so Jesus of Nazareth is the God-man. And through his life, death, and resurrection, he makes us right with God again. And yet the 4th stage is consummation. There'll come a time when Jesus will return according to Christian revelation, and he will bring a resurrection of all the dead, a judgment, and then a new creation, a time of eternity.
If you'd like to hear more from Ken Samples, check out his blog on reasons.org. Just search Reflections. Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we discuss culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Dr. Hugh Ross. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
We are still celebrating not only our 100th episode, but also the release of your latest book called Weathering Climate Change. And you have a ton of information in there. You talk about some topics that maybe some of us have never heard of. One of them is the Younger Dryas cooling event. What is that?
That happened 12,800 years ago. And we're in an ice age cycle. And when you come out of an ice age, the temperature rapidly rises to about 2 to 3 degrees centigrade above where it is now. But as it was going up, there was a cooling event that stopped it from reaching its maximum. That's the Younger Dryas cooling event.
Okay, so it stopped the temperature from reaching its maximum.
Right.
And what caused that stopping?
Well, it was discovered a little more than a year ago. They found a huge crater under 3,000 feet of ice in northern Greenland.
Oh, wow, okay.
And they were able to date it, and it's consistent with the Younger Dryas event, and it explains a lot. It explains what happened in much of North America, the reversal of major rivers in North America, and also explains why there was this global cooling event that stopped us from reaching that temperature maximum, and was actually a crucial feature in launching us into a period of stable climate.
So that's a lot of information to unpack. You started first with this giant crater that they discovered in Greenland, you said?
Yeah, northwestern Greenland.
And how did they even find that, and what?
Well, almost by accident. What happened is a NASA airplane was flying over northern Greenland and had their ice penetrating radar on. Then they found this elliptical feature under 3,000 feet of ice and said, this looks like a crater. Some geophysicists went to the site and measured the chemistry of the water flowing up underneath that glacier and said, this is the signature of a huge asteroid collision that struck 12,800 years ago.
Wow. Now, what was that asteroid? Was that called something?
They don't have a name for the asteroid, but they do know it's one of the stainless steel asteroids. And they've actually found pieces of this asteroid slightly south of the collision site.
Is this the Hiawatha impactor?
It's the Hiawatha impactor
Okay.
because it hit in the Hiawatha ice field.
Okay, so the asteroid doesn't have a name, but that's what they call.
They call it the
where-
Hiawatha impact event because
Okay.
that's the name of the ice field.
So this impact event is what caused the Younger Dryas cooling event?
Yes.
Okay, so how do those two have anything to do with climate change? Because you talk about them quite a bit in your book.
Well, yeah, again, in an ice age cycle, you normally have about 90,000 years of unstable temperature conditions where the planet is really cold. And then it comes out of that due to variations in the Earth's orbit and the rotation axis tilt, which causes the temperature to rise dramatically. And it was rising like about 12 to 15 degrees centigrade. This Younger Dryas event put a stop to that, dropped the temperature by 8 degrees centigrade. And then the temperature continued to come up, but it caused a brief period of climate stability. And then what happened is that now we have the orbital variations and the rotation axis tilt beginning to cool the planet. But at the same time, there was enough climate stability that human civilization got launched on a global scale. And the launch of human civilization had a warming effect on the climate that perfectly canceled off the cooling effect and basically set up 9,500 years of extreme climate stability.
So we've had that, we've enjoyed that, and now
Right.
we're starting to see changes where it's now kind of out of balance and we're seeing more warming than cooling.
Well, what happened is that the temperature hit a peak 8,700 years ago, and the natural cycles were cooling the planet at a slightly more rapid rate than the human activity. And so the temperature dropped 1 degree centigrade over 8,700 years. In 1950, that reversed, and the temperature has now gone up to where we're now as warm as we were 8,700 years ago. But the concern is that could keep going.
Right, that it can keep going. Well, there's plenty of information to dive into in your book, Weathering Climate Change. So is there anything that you want our viewers or our listeners to kind of glean from this conversation?
Well, from this conversation, there's actually 3 major asteroid collision events. If they didn't happen at just the right time, at just the right place, with just the right mass of the asteroid and just the right composition, we wouldn't have this period of climate stability. We wouldn't have billions of people on the face of the Earth.
So it seems to be then pointing to design, even though
Yes.
we're understanding that there's climate change and that we want to be cautious of what we do, that what we've enjoyed, that points to a creator?
Well, that's the primary theme of Weathering Climate Change. It's basically another fine-tuning book, talking about the latest discoveries that tell us everything's fine-tuned so that billions of us can live here and develop the technology where we can actually understand things like the gospel message.
Yeah. And what I love about your book is it isn't just kind of giving the data, but it's also giving some practical steps that we can do to kind of help thwart the human influence on climate change.
Yeah, we can continue this climate stability while at the same time we boost the world economy rather than crippling the world economy. So there's hope.
Thank you so much, Hugh. If you'd like to check out Hugh's book, Weathering Climate Change, go to reasons.org/2819 and you can get a copy in exchange for a donation in any amount. Now we're going to head to Give and Take, and Jeff will be talking with Stuart McAllister from RZIM about what is freedom. Let's check it out.
Hello, Jeff Zwaring here, and welcome to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas to help you be more confident in the truth of Christianity. Today I'm joined by Stuart McAllister, and we're going to take on the idea of freedom. What is it, and how do we deal with that as a Christian? Stuart, it's good to have you here.
Hi, Jeff. Good to be with you.
I enjoy working with you. You work with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. I think you're a global
Support specialist.
global support specialist,
Yeah.
so you kind of work on helping things operate properly in your ministries around the world. I know we've gotten to spend some time down in Peru, helping people down there know who Christ is and building a ministry there. This idea of freedom, that seems to be very important. It registers a lot in how we talk about things. How do people define freedom? What are we talking about when we talk about freedom?
Well, freedom, I think, and you'll know that obviously with my Scottish accent that I wasn't born in the States, but I think freedom to Americans means
freedom to do what I want, be what I want, and express myself any way I want. So it really is an unrestricted autonomy, a sense of being liberated from any restraints of any kind.
So it's kind of the independence. I mean, in a very real sense, it seems like that's what we're trying to do with our kids and raising them, is raising them to be independent. Has that kind of connotation to it?
That's the model I would say that very different from being a European. That when I was growing up, there wasn't that sense that when I picked up here was that there was a rush to get kids, give them authority, give them ability, give them skills, so that they can get on their feet as quickly as possible. And by 17 or 18, they're out to college and then they're on their own. So to be independent, self-authorized, self-orientated, self-defined, and self-driven in a way.
So kind of under your own authority, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want type mentality.
I don't think that's not what's meant to happen, but I think that's what does happen. And I think that's what's in the culture. I think there's a kind of a psychological underlay over time that has taken shape where freedom has become to be unlimited self-expression on my own terms, not subject to and not tested by or limited by any authority structure of any kind external to myself.
So it's almost like there's this freedom from authority, freedom from anything that would dictate how I do things. And it seems like the Bible casts freedom in a very different light. Talk about that.
Well, that for me, that was an experience I actually had. I tried to run away from home when I was a teenager, and eventually I, through a fight with my father, I actually did leave home. And so it was freedom from all the structures. But what I didn't understand was that freedom needs several components. You need to be free from the things that bind you, that influence you, that hurt you. But there's freedom for something. What is the positive? So negative freedom and positive freedom as defined by Isaiah Berlin. But I would say the gospel aspect of that, or being a Christian view of this, is that we need to be freed from something, so actually liberated. We need to be free for something, given a purpose, but we also need a power to be able to be free, because that's often lacking. And that's one of the parts where the gospel comes in, where it gives a power of change, not just a call to change, but the power to be different.
Well, so I know a number of universities. In fact, the one that I went to, Iowa State University, has on its library, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
So this idea of truth obviously plays pretty importantly in there. But again,
but it's
that
selective.
seems to register with what you're talking about. It's more than just, I know the truth and therefore I'm free.
It does, but most universities editorialize that, because what they do, they've taken John 8:32 and missed the verse prior. Jesus said, if you continue in my words, then you will be disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So the truth that Jesus speaking of was knowing his words and heeding them. So he was defining truth as a revelation of what he was saying, of who he was, of his teachings in life. And of course, we want to be free from God, not free under God, or free for the service of God many times.
Although it seems like in John 8:32 there, what he's talking about is the freedom to actually be under God's authority, to have a right relationship with him.
Because God's not coming to inject morality into our life, to micromanage our existence. He recognizes that we are damaged, we're broken, we have been rebels. The call to salvation is a call to receive forgiveness and to be renewed, to be free to be what we were meant to be. We're made in the image of God, by God, for God, and we have gifts and callings and purpose. So maybe I'm to be a doctor or an artist, maybe I'm to build cars or race cars, maybe I'm to be, a deep sea scuba diver, I don't know, or whatever it is, but we have a calling. But by finding our place in God and the things that bind us, being slaves to our passions, slaves to culture, slaves to other ideologies, we're can be set free from that into the freedom that Christ truly offers.
What I find interesting is, as you go further into John there after John 8:32, he's talking to the Jews and they said, if you want to be free, their response is, well, we're not enslaved to anything.
Right.
What are you talking about freedom? And Jesus immediately comes back with, if you're slave to sin, you're enslaved. And so it's almost like he's wanting to set us free from these passions, so that he's equipping us or giving us the freedom to do what he's called us to.
And I think that's a fundamental problem to many Americans, because we have a deeply ingrained, we are a free people, and that we can do what we want, and we have liberty, and all I need to do is be given enough money, time, or whatever, and I'll do this for myself. And that's precisely the problem. There's a pride, there's an arrogance, because we don't see what we are slaves to. We don't understand the captivity of our hearts or our minds. Sometimes that we are giving our time and energy to things that destroy us. People get lost in sexual relationships, or addicted to porn or drugs, or just even their career. They can destroy their families because they so want to make a name for themselves, want to be famous, or be a personality, or have the ultimate PhD or whatever. Wow the faculty and the students, write so many books, that itself can, the slave of my ego, can drive me away to a captive. It's all about me.
So what is it? What does the Bible bring that is new to that actually sets us free from those passions and that slavery to those passions?
What the Bible brings is that Jesus gives not just a call, but it's an invitation. And the invitation is to deny ourselves, to take up our cross, but we receive new life. I think people don't understand that. They think of Christianity, I love the way Michael Green put it, that Jesus did not come to make bad men good. He came to make dead men live. So if I'm lacking life, that's the basis of freedom. I can be, if I'm dead, then all the advice and the moral manuals and all the inputs and rituals would make no difference to me whatsoever. I need life, an injection of life. Christ, that's what he offers. The gospel is a promise of new life, a new kind of life in and by the Holy Spirit, so that we become transformed. We receive that in this physical body that will promise me eternal hope. And now I'm free to be what I was meant to be, and free to pursue my destiny under God's guidance, under his authority, but with a life source of energy also given in, God's power given into my soul.
Well, thanks, Stuart. I very much appreciate your comments. Just as 2,000 years ago, Jesus' word about freedom was countercultural, so it is today. But that is the beauty of the gospel, that though there's so many other things that we tend to be enslaved to, Jesus comes to set us free so that we can be the person he's designed us to be, to go out and live with purpose and passion and glorify him in all we do.
That does it for us this week on 2819. Thanks for being with us while we celebrate our 100th episode, and we also hope this episode helped equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And don't forget, subscribe to the show and search for us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show.
And if you want the podcast version, you can get it wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast. You'll find us there.
See you next week.